welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, October the 5th, 2021. We have a full agenda tonight. First item on our agenda is the Mako Management Company, MHDC request. I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Your Honor, and I'm going to turn it immediately over to Mr. Zur to give the council history on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn, Mayor, members of the council. This evening, we will have the opportunity to hear from representatives of Mako Management Company regarding a proposed request for Missouri Housing Development Commission funding to provide an income-restricted basic housing project south of Lucy Webb Road and west of Dean Avenue. This evening, we have Mr. Dan Sanders present in order to be able to provide information regarding that. From a historical perspective, this property would be affectionately identifiable within the pork chop of the development south in Raymore, the south side of Raymore. Ultimately, the background of this development has wound its way through for rezoning before the Planning and Zoning Commission as well as the City Council, which has been approved. The applicant is now coming forward in order to request a letter of support from the city for purposes of making their application for Missouri Housing Development Commission funds. With that, I would hand it over to Mr. Dan Sanders. I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Sanders is here in the audience in order to provide additional information regarding their application.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to address you this evening, and I'll keep this very short. I know you guys got a short time frame, and basically you know all about our proposals. We've worked it through rezoning, so I'm here now to follow up. We are in the process of putting together our application to Missouri Housing Development Commission. It's competitive. Community support is one of the things that they look at when they're evaluating an application. And so with that, I'd request that the city consider a favorable outlook to provide us a resolution of support at your regular meeting on Monday night. And at that, if you've got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But other than that, I have no other comments.
All right, sir. Well, I do think the council is fully aware of the project. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Sanders. Mr. Townsend, were you going to get something there?
On the, just real quick, just to help me clarify for deliberations as we consider this in the coming weeks, for this particular, and Mr. Zur and Mr. Sir, if you could also, whoever can respond, well, with this particular project and its MHDC designation and potential funding opportunities, how is the parcel designated with Missouri Housing and Urban Development? Is it under the from a housing and urban development criteria?
Be a LIHTC.
This is LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits.
Okay.
HUD plays only the part in fair housing and some of the other things we'll have to address as part of the rental. But there may be some HUD money, soft money that comes through MHDC, but it has not the regular HUD guidelines or any of the Section 8 guidelines.
Would it be designated as LIHTC?
It'll be designated LIHTC.
Okay.
And actually, now that they have loosened up some of the restrictions, there will actually be 10% of the units, 6 of the units will be market rate, so they will have no restrictions on them.
How many, what was that mix again, that ratio?
10%, 6 of the units will be completely market rate. There'll be no income restrictions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barber.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've come before us before on a parcel that was off Johnson Drive.
Yes.
Is that correct? Well, what's the difference in this one and that one? And you didn't get approved on the one on Johnson, is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, it's a very competitive, it's a scarce and competitive resource, and as a matter of fact, it's even more competitive and scarce this year because of the construction costs. MHDC's had to take some of this year's money and move it backwards to help cover the costs of other projects that were approved in the last 2 years that have had the high escalation of construction costs. So there's actually fewer resources available this year, but it's done on a scoring basis. This project will compete with every project in the Kansas City metropolitan statistical area. And 3 years ago, MHDC went to a scoring rubric, and every point will help determine who gets awarded these credits.
All right, sir. Anyone else? Mr. Sanders, I know you probably got a hint from previous conversations from both the planning and zoning and this group here that, we were a little bit disappointed in the amenities or lack of amenities with the project. You explain those by way of cost and costs associated with the land and the cost of the construction. Has there been any reconsideration by the team for additional amenities like garaging options or other amenities beyond the initial proposal?
I really don't. I mean, other than parking, these will have, the amenities in them compete with any market rate. It's brick, it's got amenities, it's got washer dryers installed, it's got all, it's built to high energy standards. These are very much market rate look, other than the parking. And again, that's just an additional cost that, and on the side, we do a community building. We'll have exercise equipment, we'll have, monthly birthday parties, they'll have gatherings, but
Okay.
that's the only thing we're not able to do, and again, that's cost-driven more than anything.
Sure. All right, sir. Anyone? Not? Thank you, sir. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
If there's no further questions, the next item on our agenda tonight is the staff recommended amendments to the city code and administrative policy manual. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. This next section, we have the items that we'll be recommending to you within the packet. You will see, basically, it is broken down into 3 sections. The first item is an amendment to the the personnel section of the administrative policy manual. That is followed by animal control city code amendments, followed by some general PD code amendments that we're going to be presenting to you. There will be, with the exception of the administrative policy manual, which we will be bringing to you all next week at your legislative meeting, the rest of these are so that you have time to look them over. We have yet to complete some brand new changes associated with liquor control and the liquor control department that we now have. And so we'll be going through those in the next couple of weeks and be bringing all of the code changes to you all the first legislative meeting of November. So you'll have time to look these over. But we wanted to give you a general overview on the animal control and PD codes and a little bit more detailed report on the Victims Economic Safety and Security Act leave that's going to be given. To that end, I will call on Ms. Auger down at the end of the table to kind of give the council an overview on the administrative policy changes.
Good evening. On August 21st, Missouri passed a new law which was for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence. This allows for employees to have up to 2 weeks of unpaid leave if they are either a victim of or somebody in their household is a victim of domestic or sexual violence. The new law is called Victims Economic Safety and Security Act, or VESA. And we do have to roll this out and to employees by October 27th of this year.
Any questions of Ms. Auger? Nothing at this time? Okay.
And again, the VESA leave.
Mr. Burke has a question.
Oh, sorry.
Is the language in this pretty much following the federal guidelines?
The state
Or
guidelines.
the state guidelines?
Yes.
So pretty much we have to do it.
It is what it is.
All right, good deal. Thanks.
Mr. Burke took the words right out of my mouth.
That's scary.
The second section is the animal control section. Specifically, where this began is the council will remember a number of months ago we came to you all and said that instead of trying the artificial means of getting people in, we have had to give up on getting animal licenses done. We have quadrupled in size, and we're still collecting the same amount of animal licenses. That's obviously not working. We can't go knocking door to door. So we eliminated that need, but we still had the wording in the code. So the first 3 sections that you see here are removing the wording calling for animal licensing and fees associated, where they now go to reserved. I'll let the chief speak to the other sections that are being added here just very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. As you see, we knew that this change in the code was going to come before the council, removing the licensing fees. So it gave us the opportunity, animal control, to take a look at some other sections of the code where they sometimes have difficulty if an animal is being abused or neglected or things like that. They really didn't have the power in the code to be able to cite individuals. So knowing that we were coming before you all to take that section of code out that dealt with licensing. So what you're seeing here is dealing with impoundment, animal cruelty, fencing, and people, individuals keeping animals on leash. Were all things that our animal control officers went over with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we have the code to back up those things that we encounter, when we come in contact with citizens who are, maybe not controlling their animals appropriately. When we get an animal bite or an animal running at large, we want to make sure the code will support what animal control is doing. And so that's what you see here, are those recommendations by our animal control officers based on what they see in everyday life when they're dealing with animals out on the street. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about those.
And this, you have timelines for tethering.
Yes.
Seems pretty restrictive. We've seen some tethered on a permanent basis, so to speak,
Well, and that's what we were finding. We were
or even
finding
while
that
people are away at work.
individuals were tying animals out for hours and sometimes days at a time when it was very hot, and we didn't have, and we would have good citizens who would contact us and say, this animal is, tied out here, it doesn't have any water, it's hot, all of those things. But we really didn't have the capability in the code to do anything about, those animals that were tied out just basically in perpetuity.
I would assume, though, it would give you flexibility if there's a house and other things that are available for the comfort of the
Sure.
animal.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, usually what our animal control officers encounter are those really extreme cases where someone just is not caring for that animal and leaving it tied out, just for, hours and hours. And it's a case of we want to be able to impound those animals, basically take them into protective custody when that situation exists where someone's not caring for that animal. And we really didn't have that capability before.
Anybody else have any questions? I know we're just now getting it, so
Exactly.
They'll look at it for the-
Exactly. So there'll be quite a bit of time if somebody comes up with any comments or questions that they might have of the chief on these. Chief, if you could speak then to the amended code section that is immediately behind the animal control. As the council can see, a lot of these are an age limit change from 17 to 18. So that's the beginning of this, but we also have some cleanup items also behind that.
Absolutely. The majority of those that you see here were when the state changed the age of a minor from 17 to 18. It required that change in all of our code where we dealt with age, things like curfew or, coming in contact with juveniles. So when the state made the change, obviously we had to go in. So that all of those things doesn't really change how we do business with regard to dealing with juveniles other than the age is changed. And again, that was state law, much like VESA. We are just required to make that change in what we're considering to be a juvenile. So it's now 18 years, under the age of 18 rather than 17. We also found as we were going all through the code that there were just a few cleanup items as we looked at what the state statute provided us with regard to some of these things. You see hindering prosecution. We just wanted to provide some extra language so that the officers would have the capability to cite someone, as you see, giving a false name or false information or date of birth. So what you see here in these other sections, in addition to the age of 18, are just us going through the code and making sure that we weren't hindering our officers in them being able to do their job because the wording didn't exist in the state statute. So you'll see, we added "or park" because the state statute doesn't talk about parking. It just talks about operating a vehicle with expired plates on the street. So those things are just cleanup on our part, making sure that our officers have the capability to write those, much like animal control, that they're able to write those citations when they come in contact with folks in those cases where the state statute doesn't really provide adequate language for us to be able to do that. And then last but not least, those new code sections, and I'm sure, once you get a chance to take a look at this, you'll have lots of questions about possession of controlled substances. There are all sorts of things out there that are not just marijuana. Previously our code dealt, pretty exclusively with marijuana, and there's all sorts of other drugs, other manufactured substances that are not just marijuana. And so these proposed sections, which again, I'm sure you all have lots of questions once you've had a chance to take a look at it, give us the capability to deal with individuals when we come in contact with folks who have, some of those manufactured or designer drugs that I'm sure Councilman Burke sees at school all the time. Yeah, absolutely. But those are those new code sections that we'll be proposing, to make sure that we have the capability of dealing with those.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Anything else? Anybody? Any questions? Mr. Circo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Chief, I like that part there of that licensing. I see that a lot in places, and driving up the street, I see people with temp tags that are almost a year old.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering how these people drive up and down the streets with these temp tags almost a year old. I know if I did, I'd get caught the first day and get a ticket. It's just my luck. But I see people do it constantly, everywhere. 6 months, 9 months.
We're keeping an eye on you, though, just so you know.
Yeah, I know. That's why I keep mine up to date, ma'am. I know better. But I do see that quite a bit. So I'm glad we're going to really pursue that because there's a lot of that going out there.
All the time. And as I said, the state statute was really restrictive in, you were only in violation if you were operating the vehicle and not parking the vehicle.
Yes.
So we added park back in. So
Yeah, I
that,
see those parts, yeah.
yeah, so that we have the capability to cite individuals on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. The last code change that we're going to be bringing to you, and this one, like the VESA Act, has to come to you all next Monday night for passage so that we can, by December 1, have the new Show Me Courts system entirely in place. A portion of Show Me Courts, which we're going to explain to you as the next item on the agenda, requires a change in the statewide court automation fund. And the upshoot of this is, you see on this particular page here, which is actually the ordinance that you will be looking at next week. It's going to amend Section 13300A of court costs. You will remember that some time ago there was a $7 fee proposed to go to the sheriff's fund. When that was ruled to be unconstitutional, Show Me Courts decided that they'd grab it, and so now there is $7 out of every ticket that will go to the statewide court automation fund, which we'll explain to you shortly. There are a number of items that are going to be on that. It'll be kind of a counterpoint, the next item, because Mr. Zur is going to introduce it to be more civil than what I will then be following up with the council on Missouri Show Me Courts. But this is a change to Section 11 of the court section, allowing for that $7 charge to be put into place to go down to Missouri Show Me Courts through the Missouri Director of Revenue. The The amount is not actually listed in here because we have every anticipation that every couple of years that amount will go up. So Mr. Zer's recommendation in writing this particular amendment to the code is that we simply refer to the charge as it has been approved within those sections of statute when they inevitably raise that particular charge. And so that is the last item. Before you have any questions just on this, yeah, or you can mold it into the next agenda item where we're going to overview Missouri Show Me Courts for you.
But just roll it. Just keep rolling.
Thank you, sir.
about
I
Show Me
will
Courts.
ask Mr. Zer to give you the statesman-like approach to Missouri Show Me Courts.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn, Mayor, members of the council. The Missouri Show Me Courts initiative, basically it stems from, a number of you might recall, the Senate Bill 5 a number of years ago, where the court system for the local municipalities was looked at very closely by some of the legislature as well as the state courts administration. This is a continuation of that one, and it's an attempt to continue to automate and to maintain a overview for OSCA, which is the Office of the State Courts Administrator. Moving forward, the municipal courts which we've operated are going to have more automation where they will be sharing files and sharing information, going along with that $7 charge with the county as well as the state level. It's intended to help to streamline the process. I'm sure many of our municipal courts are not going to feel quite that way. And that's as far as I'll go with that one. Mr. Fearborn, I'm sure will have more colorful comment perhaps for that. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to implement the Show Me Courts process, and that's what you have for your first amendment of the code changes. What I would tell you is that probably one of the best descriptions I have for the Show Me Courts initiative came from an individual from the Missouri Municipal Attorneys Association, and I'll give credit where it's due, Chris Lebeck, in responding on their listserv for it. And he's outlined the three options that are really available to municipalities as it comes to the Missouri Show Me Courts initiative. The first is ask your council to jettison your municipal court to the associate circuit level at the county courthouse, which would mean instead of providing court services for Raymore residents here in Raymore for any citations, they'd have to go down to the county at Harrisonville in order to sit through whatever dockets are associated with the municipal courts there. The other alternative would be if you are in a charter county, you can work to create a piggyback onto the county municipal court. We don't have that particular option here. And the third option that Mr. Lebeck identified was bite the bullet, ask your council to implement the required $7 court automation charge and execute the agreement, purchase the necessary equipment, advise the city administration that control of your court staff, municipal court finances, and et cetera will now fall under the Office of the State Court Administrator oversight primarily, and proceed to onboard to Show Me Courts with a big smile. Unfortunately, OSCA and the Court Automation Committee are taking the position that this is a voluntary as opposed to an unfunded mandate. So, hey, you can voluntarily participate in the Show Me Court system. Your alternative ultimately is going to be you don't have a municipal court and you go down to Harrisonville in order to have your case heard for your municipal court citations. So I appreciated Mr. Lebeck's candor when he put together that outline, and I think it was a pretty good way of kind of explaining for your purposes what would end up happening.
Which some smaller municipal courts have actually done.
Absolutely, they have, sir, and are probably are looking at that very closely even now moving forward. So I'm happy to answer any
Not one
questions.
that would likely be feasible for us, though, as large as our dockets are.
And for a citizen convenient or defendant convenience standpoint, sir.
I viewed this from a strategic plan perspective of you're optimizing technology in order to provide excellent customer service to the citizens of Raymore who happen to have to come into municipal court.
Yeah. It hasn't been a real user-friendly new system. I know I'm talking to the court clerks, not just ours, but from around the area. They're not real happy with it, but like you said, biting the bullet.
A number of the other details that are associated with it in addition to this, basically it takes, they had been moving towards having a melded CJIS downstairs reporting system with the court being CJIS. They abandoned that, and this is basically a court, it's under the umbrella of a court reporting system. The problem is that examples, tickets as they are written downstairs do not match the Missouri Show Me Court ticketing system. So every ticket will have to be manually entered into the Missouri Show Me Court system. The funds that are collected on those tickets cannot be commingled with city funds. So we now have to take out a bank account just for the court. We cannot automate that bank account, which means, in essence, the security of the court is going to be much lessened. Checks that are written right now, as the mayor is very well aware, 6 eyes are on our checks before they go out, as far as the checks and balances, pardon the pun, system. In this case, there will be a checkbook strictly for the court. Only 2 people are allowed to sign those checks, and that is the court administrator and the finance director, if you're in a large enough court. So we will have to set up the bank account, and those will be unsupervised checks going out of the court. We're going to try to set something up that we don't get crossways with the court auditors when they come in, where somebody else can put their eyes on those, but they're looking for that particular level of independence. The reporting system will be uniform with all of the other courts. That is probably one of the better things that will come out of this for the convenience of whoever those reports are going to. They'll be seeing the same thing all the time. So any anomalies would certainly, you would hope, would stick out to a greater degree.
And it doesn't marry with Encode, does it?
It does not marry with Encode, sir.
So, but we will keep the Encode system up and running? I mean, I assume that we will.
We actually worked through that. We're going to have to for a while for historical purposes.
Right.
If we have to go back and look. Now, those same things will be, we're going to have to enter those in. There'll be a cutoff date. Our date for implementation of Missouri Show Me Courts is December 1 by order of the presiding judge for the county, which we are a division of. And so on December 1, all of this switches over, and everything, all of those cases that are not decided, all of those funds have to be pushed out of the Encode system, which will be simpler than I thought it was going to be, because we'll be writing a check to each of the 7 different groups that we have to pay money out of the tickets to that don't actually go to our court system, but are part of the $250 cap. You can't charge more. You have a $250 charge, but all of these different fees eat into the $250 charge against what is being collected by the court to run the court. That concludes staff report on this item, sir.
Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tangential question. Have we gotten to the point where our caseload is necessitating another night for our courts, or are we still okay?
Not as yet, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions before we move on to the next topic? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. The next topic is the budget again. We're getting close to proposing that for approval, and kind of want to give us an update on where we're at.
Yes, sir. In front of you is the latest spreadsheet. The council at your last meeting had some limited questions about some items that were already, you had already decided to put in the budget, that you'd asked staff to begin exploring on, that we don't necessarily have a report out on. An example of one of those was the signs that Mr. Holman had proposed. That 150 is already in the budget. Staff is already doing research on a possible series of recommendations to the city council associated with the signs. There had been a discussion on the Fox Ridge Drive street modifications, which is the first item, or the next item in your packet, actually. You can see there from Mr. Crass, there is the possibility that we could put in a curb where there is currently double yellow line. What we found out in our researches is the double yellow line can actually be crossed with a hard left turn. You can't pass somebody on a double yellow line. So the issue, as we explored it, wasn't somebody making a hard left into Willow Wind. It was somebody entering, and you can see it on the diagram there, somebody was actually entering the left turn, the southbound left turn lane that's there, thinking that that was a chicken lane, basically.
Right.
And so that it was a free lane, even though the arrows are painted there. So it wasn't a question of the hard left turn in front of somebody. It was a question of them merging into a lane they weren't supposed to be merging into, leading to the idea that somebody was going to head on, not T-bone, but head on somebody going southbound in that left turn lane. Simplest way and the most effective way to cure that is to put a curb in. You still have to leave openings for the left turn into the Walgreens parking lot, the left turn into what we call the Dairy Queen parking lot, and the left turn onto the drive that that started this conversation. But we could put the curb in there, which would very effectively dissuade somebody, especially if it was a painted yellow curb, from the first time somebody tried to bounce over one of those things, they'd figure out real quick that's not a chicken lane sitting over there. And we'd make sure that the left turn component was well advertised. Total cost for that is $30,000. The water issue that Mr. Crass brings up within here is surmountable. Grading lifted curbs or cuts, small 1-foot cuts in the curb to allow the water drainage to continue on the pattern that it's currently on. Again, he provided the diagram associated. There was also a question, we had told the council that we would get back with you all with the accident data for that particular stretch. That's the third page you see here. Starts with current, and it's from Ms. German down in PD. I'll let the chief speak to that.
Thank you, sir. That intersection, and Kathy did an excellent job putting the information together. It is, I don't know, a little difficult, I guess, to make sure that you're actually counting the right accidents, because that is such a big intersection, and we do get a lot of fail to yield at the actual intersection that really doesn't have anything to do with that area that we're talking about, either turning into Willow Wind or turning into Dairy Queen. And so as you can see there, she had deleted those accidents. When the officers say this accident happened at 58 in Fox Ridge, that could be anything. It could be all the way down to the apartments. It could be, north, in this area that we're talking about, or right in the middle of the intersection as well. But what we found, when she did a hard count on that, there were only 2 accidents that occurred from 2018 through the current time. Those fail to yields, but that was a fail to yield in 2020 of someone trying to execute a U-turn, and then someone pulling facing west on Remington, and then they pulled out into southbound and they failed to yield as well. So, not really. When you discount all the other accidents that happen at that intersection, there in the area that we're talking about, it's not the problem, I think, that we were concerned about.
$30,000 is, Mr. Crass says, a good cure for this, so the council knows. And that concludes staff report on this item. If you'd like me to move on, or if the council would like to debate this item.
Is there any additional discussion about that? About that curbing? Do we really feel like it's necessary? I mean, given the lack of calls. I don't travel it that much, just every Wednesday.
Sorry. It initially should have been done in the very beginning. I mean, obviously, we didn't know it was going to be like that, but it's a significant issue, people coming into that lane.
Large trucks negotiating it be just fine.
Yeah, what Mr. Crass had proposed is that the lane itself, and you can kind of see it on his rough drawing, would actually start back a little bit to cure the problem of people bouncing into the lane, thinking it's a chicken lane, but allow for the left turn off of eastbound 58 highway. And in fact, he had even talked about it being one of those curves that tapers down to the end, but we would give plenty of room for the left turning movement, and then taper down would also help for a large truck trying to come in, sir.
Moving forward then, with installation, or would that be a budget item that we would leave on the budget for
It would need to
purposes of
be,
following through?
it would be up to the council whether you wanted to move it from down below the green line to up above the green line with the items you've already approved for next year's budget, sir.
I would assume from Mr. Barber's comments, if there's no real opposition to it, we would move it above the line for consideration
Ms.
during
Williams?
the budget process, right? All good with that? Okay.
Thank you.
Consensus is?
Second hard dollar item was somebody had brought up the street sweeper and the comparison of would it be possible for us to outsource that for the 4 street sweepings a year. We provide you with the comparison of the two. It would be per year would be $133,200. That's a hard quote that we received for 4 street sweepings a year. Over the 11-year VERP period, that would mean $1,465,200. The purchase of the street sweeper would be $175,000 one-time cost, and then Mr. Crass outlines the recurring costs associated with that, which would include the VERP payment, is $43,600 a year. The comparison between the two items is $654,600. My recommendation to the city council on this particular item would be that it be one of those items that was outlined by the mayor, that let's wait and see the maintenance costs associated with keeping the existing street sweeper running for another 2 to 3 years. It's getting close to its useful life, but 2 to 3 years could make all the difference in your consideration of this. If it absolutely fails here in the next few months, we can always do a budget amendment in the middle of the winter when we're not using it to add this item to the budget at a later date. That would be my recommendation to the council.
Very good with that one? Okay. Yeah, no kidding. I hear you.
Similar to that item, we're still looking at the leaf vacuum process and some sort of a recommendation. One of the things I would remind the council in the near term, going into the fall, of course, before we would even be able to purchase the item, we do have unlimited leaf pickup through our
Yes, we do.
Constable.
If people will take the
I
time to
wonder
do
if
it.
it's more of an education campaign for our people, just a blitz education campaign for our people. You can have your entire front yard filled with leaf bags, and they're going to pick them up.
Well, and you could say that it would cost the taxpayers this much for us to do something like this to help us, with that process.
Whereas you're getting this right now, it's within the
Exactly.
cost of what you're paying. So.
Yeah, I like that.
I would say this, and this could get really dangerous. There are smaller communities that provide the bags, but it can get expensive.
Great.
When you were talking about the campaign, I instantly thought of, well, we could give one to each customer with a bag that has Raymore printed on it and with the instructions. I don't know if that would be worth, that might be expensive. Maybe we could print a little card to put in it and just give them a free one.
I don't think it'd be as expensive if we simply excluded Silver Lake, sir. Is the council okay with us waiting till next year? We will look into the bag process for sure, and the communication process over the course of the next couple of months.
Okay.
There had been some discussion on, we have above the green line $5,000 for the December holiday. Councilmember Barber had brought up The possibility of that just becoming kind of a regular deal, or if you do it for so many years, the expectation is it's going to be a regular deal. The only other way to look at that would be to add a second personal day for our employees. Actually, the personal day doesn't cost us anything. The extra holiday is considered a holiday, and so there's overtime involved, thus the $5,000. If somebody's taken another personal day, they would have been paid for that day anyway, so that's actually a $0 amount, just for council consideration.
Any comment? Anyone? Okay. Anything else, Jim?
Last item, again, city staff is looking at the signs and possible presentation to the council on those. One of the things we'd want the council to consider, I know it was intro to you all with the Remington Island and the Remington sign. We've already got a municipal sign on 58 Highway. Maybe we should convert it right over here. Just kind of throw that out because you're going to hear about it later from Mr. Icky.
Sure.
Not tonight, but later. The last item that came up, which was actually another agenda item, but would impact next year's budget, is the mayor's compensation discussion that the council had. If the council wants to continue any discussions relative to that tonight.
Mr. Mayor, I did want to, on that particular topic, I had a quick conversation with Mr. Holman, who had raised the idea in regards to that, and given the survey that Mr. Abdelgawad had asked for as well, and I think probably the recommendation would be to kind of push this until next year's budget cycle, just because we got the first read next week of the budget, and given the disparities between the different municipalities and what the compensation packages are for the mayoral position, gives staff that much more time to prepare and would not be as much of a hit to the budget this year. So that would be, if the council would agree, to kind
everybody's
of
good with
push
that.
that discussion to next cycle.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, anything else?
That concludes staff report on this item, sir.
Okay, so item D, anybody else have anything with regard to the proposed budget for 2022? If not, we'll go ahead and close out with the anything other. Under other?
Back on that item, sir, staff has no other items, but what we will be doing is taking the items that are above the green line, and for next week's first reading of the budget and public hearing, we will be typing up the motion to be made to include the city manager's proposed budgets with the following additions taken out of available fund balance from the general fund, and we'll list these items out, and we will have wording for those to be determined items that you see above the line.
Yeah.
That is also.
And I don't think it'd occur, but if anybody is dissatisfied with any of those items on the list, you can make that amendment at that time, motion at that time, to exclude that from that budget item. Okay? Yes?
Sorry, just to make sure that I'm understanding, so from this point, we can't add anything else to the budget?
At
But
any
that's
point,
what our discussion was about tonight.
Okay,
If you
that's-
wanted
yeah.
to add something to it. Do you have something?
No.
we are researching a couple of your items that you had brought up. At any point during the year, the budget can be amended, and at staff recommendation for certain. And we're specifically looking at one of your non-cost items to present to you. Mr. Mustine is on it. So,
Okay. Anything else? Anything under other?
no, sir.
Anybody else have anything under other? If not, I'd entertain a motion to move into executive session.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend?
I move that we move into executive session pursuant to revised Missouri Statute 610, TAC 021, subsection 2.
Is there a second? Mr. Barber?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Motion's been made and seconded to move into executive session. And we have to do a roll call vote.
Councilman Abdelgawad,
Yes.
Councilman Barber,
Yes.
Councilman Townsend,
Yes.
Councilman Burke,
Aye.
Councilman Circo,
Yes.
and Councilwoman Will Scherzer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now go into executive session. When we're done with that, we're done.